Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we're discussing how the new Burnham administration can accelerate its plans for infrastructure investment and actually start to turn ambition into reality. My guest is Sir John Armitt, arguably one of the most prominent, knowledgeable and influential figures when it comes to setting and delivering UK infrastructure policy. As former long-standing chair of the National Infrastructure Commission, a past president of the Institute of Civil Engineers, former boss of Network Rail and contractor Costain, and the leader of high-profile infrastructure projects such as the London 2012 Olympics, Medway Crossing and Channel Tunnel high-speed rail link, he really needs no further introduction. Well, Sir John is now chair of the new Public-Private Partnership Commission, which aims to overhaul how the UK selects, funds, delivers and operates infrastructure. And in a recent Financial Times editorial, John and the Commission advocated for a new Office for Budget Responsibility for Infrastructure, designed to, as he puts it, shield major investments from political interference and move decisions away from the so-called Treasury brain. Well, lots to unpack there and lots of stuff which is happening right now across government, because infrastructure investment is, as we continue to hear, critical to the government's plan to devolve power, accelerate growth and drive living standards up across the whole of the UK. But despite huge amounts of ambition, delivery remains challenging. Decades of short-term policy pivots and inflated project delivery costs have hampered our ability to turn great visions into reality. And this has to change. So, let's hear how political leaders like Andy Burnham can better navigate our 5-year electoral cycles and actually unlock the vast amounts of private capital ready and willing to rebuild the nation's delivery capability. John, welcome back to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and great to be with you again.
Well, look, great to see you again, John. And let's get straight into your headline. I mean, your recent Financial Times article, you argued that what the country needs is an independent expert body with a clout that reassures investors and tries to stop ministers from making stupid decisions. I mean, how would you define the core function and statutory authority of an Office for Budget Responsibility for Infrastructure compared to the oversight bodies we have right now?
Well, as you say, the interesting thing about the OBR is that its job is not to actually recommend policy. Its job is to listen, if you like, to government policy and then critique that in terms of, does it actually think it is viable, deliverable, and is it a policy which is going to actually deliver the outcomes which government seeks? Will the policy actually enable it to meet its fiscal requirements, et cetera, et cetera? Now, you then would have to adapt that in terms of infrastructure. But the fundamental thing, of course, is that it is not there to say, well, this is the policy you should follow. It's there to say, right, that's the policy you said you're going to adopt. Now, let's see whether that is credible, whether that's deliverable, and so on. And that at least would stop, or possibly, government sort of charging off down a route, right, which in fact, you could, if you took the housing, for example, it would have been interesting to know what such an organisation might have said a couple of years ago when the government said, we're going to build 1.5 million homes by 2030. Everybody in the industry said, you haven't got a fair chance. But in fact, we plough on. And even today, they're still saying, yes, well, it's not a target we're prepared to drop. So somebody statutory, in a sense, reporting to the wider public and, of course, to Parliament, able to say that would, I think, be useful.
Well, you spoke forcefully about the Treasury brain, prioritising short-term penny pinching that delays major schemes and swells total budgets. I believe we are now hearing about Treasury policy being shifted to number 10 North at the moment. I mean, why is the Treasury structurally incapable of long-term systemic thinking, and how does an OBRI break that cycle?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and of course, traditionally, you and I would have said, well, to get anything done, you need number 10 on side and you need number 11 on side. Until you've got those two sort of on side, then it's difficult to actually deliver anything substantial. So if we're now saying, well, actually, number 10 is going to really grab hold of the levers and remove the levers to an extent from number 11, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, we saw it with George Brown back in the Institute of the Department of Economic Affairs, which was around for a while, and then that everything went back to normal, back to Treasury. The difficulty for Treasury, to be fair to them, is they live in this world of annual budgeting, and so they're constantly sort of, if you like, as we might be if we were sitting at home, sort of looking at where's my money going, what can I afford, and what can I do? Oh, well, we better stop ordering those for the next 6 weeks and get cash flow back into balance and so on. And poor old Treasury, I think, lives in that sort of world, which is totally unsuited to what we're talking about, which is sort of 10 to 20 year investment programs.
So how do you see this new announcement by government to actually move that function to number 10 Manchester then?
Well, I think it's a sense of what we're hearing from Andy Burnham, which, of course, number 10 wanting to grab hold of the steering wheel. Now, we saw that very much with Maggie Thatcher, and it will lead you down a particular direction of travel. I mean, I heard this morning that they've now decided to, as well as Manchester, to give the mayor of the West Midlands the right to actually control the buses,
right,
and sort of take that over in Birmingham. So the interesting thing with Andy Burnham is this sort of shift towards more public control. And personally, I would say, well, that's all well and good, but as I used to say to Andy when he was mayor of Manchester, can you afford it? Because you will go down the line of wanting to provide social support, in a sense, and social services, which don't work in a balanced book world. So you're going to have to find extra government funding to do that. And I think that's going to be the challenge.
Yeah, well, because skeptics might argue that creating an OBRI, an Office of Public Responsibility for Infrastructure, might simply add another layer of centralised bureaucracy in an environment where, as you say, these decisions are being devolved. So why do we need this new centralised oversight body rather than perhaps reforming existing departmental mechanisms?
Well, and of course, we reformed the NIC and turned it into NISTA. Now, I would argue that was a mistake. It's a separate subject. But in the sense, what it did was removed independence. So the degree of independence that the NIC had disappeared completely, really, with the creation of NISTA, which became a Department of Treasury. What we're looking for all the time is more cross-party support. And that requires a bigger debate. And the OBR can help to create that bigger debate and an open statutory body which was reporting on government policy and the ability of that policy to deliver. Because government constantly says it's all about delivery now. And to be fair, they've got a 10-year infrastructure strategy. And so, NISTA's job is to deliver it. But NISTA doesn't have any power. Yeah. So how on earth can it do that? So the argument simply really is to, I think, with an OBR type organisation, is to create a bigger, more open debate about what we're trying to do and how we're going to do it.
Because that, John, is about creating market confidence. Because you've highlighted the need, the UK needs to spend 100 billion a year in infrastructure investments, split 50-50 roughly between the taxpayer and private capital. It requires this confidence from the public sector to actually make it happen.
Yes, no, that's right. The private sector, the private sector's objectives are quite simple, aren't they? Is there an investable project here in which I can be confident that the environment that investable project is going to be in is going to be consistent for the next 10 years or however long you're looking at, say 20 years for major schemes. And if you don't create that, then they're going to be very reluctant to invest because of the uncertainty.
And that has happened because you point to successful models like the Thames Tideway Tunnel, contracts for difference for offshore wind, Manchester Airport Terminal 2. So for you, what is the common thread then running through these successes, and how does an OBRI make that common thread standard practice rather than exceptions?
Well, that's a very good question because you and I have said for a long time that for the last 50 years we've known basics of how to deliver a major project. Why do we not stick to it? Why do we keep on trying to invent the wheel? Why on HS2 do we actually decide to go down the route of new technology rather than actually take existing technology, which has been working for the last 50 years across Europe, and simply apply that to HS2? We didn't need to get from London to Manchester 5 minutes quicker by speeding up the trains. We needed to get there reliably and efficiently. And yet an over-specified project, then starting it too soon, all the things which we know, and yet it happens again. And it happens particularly, I think, in the public sector, where you've got that pressure on ministers to be able to announce things.
Yeah, world beating this, world beating that.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, if you were to have a serious discussion with the consumer, I don't think they would see that as being the main priority. It's reliable, comfortable, and on time and affordable. That's what they want.
Hence the creation of National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, NISTA. But you noted in the FT that, and as you alluded to earlier, despite having good people, NISTA lacks capacity and capability and has limited authority. So, what was the original strategic intention behind NISTA, and where's it falling short?
Well, I think because, if you take the NIC element of it, you used to have a group of commissioners who were permanent, were signed up and constantly involved in developing new policies in different subject areas.
Independently.
Yeah. And what has happened to the commissioners in the NISTA model? And if you take the chairman, I used to be signed up for 2 or 3 days a week as the chairman of the NIC. The chairman of NISTA is 2 days a month.
Right.
The government attitude is, we've got a panel of experts now. So at 9:30 tomorrow morning, I can ring up the expert on A, B, or C and say, can you give me an answer by 2:00 on what I should be doing about this? Rather than actually spending, as we did, 6 months considering that in a roundtable approach where everybody has a voice and we listen to the wider public, etc. We don't rely on just one single expert's view, which is where they are now. And of course, the NISTA now covers both economic and social infrastructure and defence and housing. So it's got everything with fewer people than the IPA had before.
Well, no. Well, I spoke to Becky Wood a few weeks ago, and you absolutely cannot afford a passion to get things done. And there's an incredible amount of real enthusiasm to transform the way we're doing this. But as you say, is the inability, is it fundamentally flawed by design, or is it something which has been designed by Whitehall?
Well, it's one bunch of civil servants sitting at the centre in Treasury, which is NISTA, without any levers to pull other than persuasion, having to then get the half a dozen government departments to actually go along with what they want as opposed to what that individual department wants. And no authority to do it other than I'm from Treasury, so I'm here to sort of beat you up and make sure you do it.
Well, if an OBR is created to handle this independent scrutiny and parliamentary reporting, so how do you see the specific operational role that NISTA might retain?
Well, I think there was always an argument for what the IPA was doing, which was to support government departments, where government departments had a requirement to deliver something, whether it was a school, a hospital, or a prison, whatever it was, and they could measure how that project was proceeding. And of course, they published their reports, red, amber, green, in terms of how they think those projects are going, and they can hold seminars on project management to try and inculcate the best levels of project management into the government sector. I mean, to be fair, I used to say, well, actually, if they do that well, there's no reason why they shouldn't become the go-to people for public and private sector. They become the centre of excellence of how to run a project.
Well, they spent a lot of time upskilling ministers, upskilling civil servants, and that was a vital part to make sure that these projects, which were quite often one-off projects, were managed by people who knew what they were doing.
Now, having said all of that, when they were in existence as the IPA, they would complain, senior people there would complain that they just did not have the resources to do what was required of them. And that was before they took on some of the wider brief, particularly defence, for goodness sake. Now, the NIC was there to recommend policy. It did that through a whole series of reports, and those reports were probably 80% of the recommendations were accepted by government in principle. The challenge then was turning that acceptance into principle into new government policy. And that, I think, was the gap which needed to be filled. And by removing authority from the system in the NISTA becomes simply part of Treasury, what have you added? I'm not sure you've added anything, because that ability to actually direct is the great difficulty, and I accept this for government, is it's not like a company. The powers of the individual secretaries of state are greater than the powers of an individual divisional director in a private sector company. Yeah. The CEO can crack the whip. We're all around the table, guys. Look, if you don't agree with me, then go away. Find another job. It's much more difficult for the Prime Minister to do that, particularly with powerful secretaries of state who've got their own political following.
Right. So having led major successes like High Speed 1 and the 2012 London Olympics, what do you think the core government departments have lost? Have they lost the capacity to manage and deliver complex major projects effectively?
We know that there are things which have gone well in recent years. The A14, for example, a major project which was completed on time and on budget, primarily because they have very good project management systems. And it wasn't an enormous project. I think the knowledge is there. What is lacking is that total drive and commitment to do something. Successful companies are driven by very determined chief executives who are delivering for the shareholders. If they don't, then they're out. And you could argue that a minister, if he doesn't deliver the policy, should be out. But if the policy keeps changing, or the minute, how many ministers of construction or transport have we had over the last 20 years?
Many.
Probably at least 20. And they're not regarded as really senior appointments. They're stepping stones to something greater. So I'll be here for 18 months, and with a bit of luck, I'll get promoted and on to something else. So you haven't got a consistency of vision. New guy comes in, or woman, and the first thing they do is, well, I've got to put my stamp on this, so then let's have a review of the policy. And so everybody groans, puts their head in their hands, and waits for the smoke to come out the chimney as to what the next policy is going to be. And
meanwhile, the departments are left picking up the pieces.
They spend ages reorganising to pick up the pieces, exactly, as you say, an enormous amount of wasted effort.
Yeah. Well, moving forward, John, you're now chairing the Public-Private Partnership Commission. This aims to overhaul, as I said earlier, how UK selects, delivers funds and operates infrastructure. So how does the Commission practically translate these high-level strategic aims into perhaps policy intervention?
Well, this commission, to be fair, is not a government commission. This is a self-appointed commission, but with a lot of interest, actually, and a lot of people on board, particularly from the private sector.
No, you've got major industry players like Bechtel, Lang O'Rourke, AWS, Serco on the commission. How does it work?
So the objective is to say to government, look, we threw the baby out with the bathwater back in 2008 when we abandoned PFI. Yes, there were faults in PFI. But given the scale of what we need to do across economic and social infrastructure, we know that the government cannot afford to do it all.
Yeah.
So let's take the opportunity to use private sector money. Let's take the opportunity to understand what worked, what didn't work last time round, and apply that and get a proper balanced system in place where we can encourage the private sector, particularly the long-term investors, to come on board. We can demonstrate a consistency of policy. And we can learn, for example, from the water industry that, in fact, this will need some public sector oversight to make sure that dividends don't come ahead of the need to invest within those organisations. Yeah. Now, if we can't do that, then we might as well all go home.
No.
And so the objective is to try and get that debate back on the table, to support the government in delivering all the things it needs to do, because, to be frank, it can't afford to do it all by itself.
Yeah. And are there specific? I mentioned the list of people you've got on the commission from industry. Are there specific pain points or common pain points that these private sector partners are reporting when they're trying to deploy capital?
Well, yes. The uncertainty, really, I think, of are we going to be subjected to windfall taxes, for example? Are we going to see a consistency of planning policy? Are we going to see improvements in our ability to actually get these things brought forward in something less than sort of 6 years before we can put a spade in the ground? And are we going to see, if there is the necessary government support? It's interesting this morning to read that 2 data centres have been approved in Scotland with quite significant chunks of public money underwriting the private sector investment. Now, clearly the government has made a decision there. Data centres, Scotland, 2 things, tick box, very important. So we'll use the National Wealth Fund to actually provide some support to that. Now, the guys on the private sector side will need to understand that support comes with certain apron strings attached, because once the government's put some money in, they'll want to have a seat at the table and so on. But, again, you come down to, let's just have a sensible, honest, open debate about how we're going to do these things between private and public, recognise that at the end of the day, we are doing this because there is an absolute need to do it.
Yeah.
Now, how do we best put those two things together?
And that's what the PPP Commission is all about.
We try and produce some recommendations as to how to do that. Quite frankly, at the moment, we're looking not just in the UK, we're looking around the world and saying, well, where has this worked well? Where it hasn't? What are the parameters which ensure that something works well? Now, how can we apply those parameters in a UK context?
Yeah. And to be fair, John, you've been pretty candid. But you've warned that if leaders like Andy Burnham do not grasp this nettle and their plans for national renewal, they're doomed to fail, I think the phrase you use. I mean, what would you say is the single most critical decision political leaders have to make right now to stop this national decline in infrastructure?
Well, in a way, it's be more honest. Be more open about the challenge. Don't kid people that you're going to do something because it sounds good. Don't say, we're going to build 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years, when that is at a rate which has not been achieved for the last 50 years. What's going to surround the ability to do that? And there's been nothing, really. In fact, if anything, if you talk to the housing sector, life has become more difficult in the last 2 or 3 years, not easier, to the point where people are now not investing in land, they're not building, the market's collapsed. A whole series of factors which actually make it more difficult to build homes rather than easier. And the government says, we're going to put some public money in now and we're going to sort of create some social housing. But the numbers, are small compared with the overall objective. So, there really has to be an open and frank discussion about what we're trying to achieve. It's not just about numbers. It's about the quality of the homes. It's about where they are. You've got the whole planning regime. You've got the changes in building safety codes. Everything is mitigated against actually getting on and doing stuff in the last 2 or 3 years. And so it's not surprising that, in London, hardly any starts compared with the massive number which are required each year in London. So until somebody gets open and honest about this, let's have an open debate. Let's have a cross-party debate. Let's understand what we're trying to do and what is realistic, not what is optimistic and unlikely to be achieved.
Yeah, and I imagine that also includes having some kind of more systemic thinking about how all these individual departments work together. Because, for instance, you mentioned data centres. Great, build a data centre, but you've got to also have the energy supply that goes with that.
Well, energy and water.
Yeah, and water. Yeah, data centres, they can be put together in 18 months to 3 years. Putting in place an energy network and a water supply network can take several parliamentary cycles. How are there concrete mechanisms that an OBRI, for instance, can introduce to create that kind of cross-party, cross-departmental systemic thinking?
Well, all the OBR does is open up the, if you like, the credibility of a government policy and reports on that and creates that open debate, which causes government to potentially be a bit more cautious before it makes the announcement in the first place, because, we see it with the budget, don't we? Government terrified that the budget's going to be rubbish by OBR the day after it's announced.
Correct,
so there's clearly that sort of wicket rolling which goes on between the two beforehand.
Yeah. Well, weeks in advance it goes on.
Yeah. So you could try and do that same thing with your major infrastructure announcements, particularly social as much as economic. But by itself, of course, it's not enough. The original NIC proposal was that the NIC wouldn't report to government, but it would report to Parliament. Yeah. And the thinking behind that was, again, to try and get more cross-party support, because the starting point of the NIC was a question of, the Olympics was great, wasn't it? We all pulled in the same direction. Yeah. Why can't we do that all the time?
But I do remember HS2 having very clear cross-party support for quite a long while as well. So just having cross-party support isn't necessarily the key to delivery success.
Well, and of course, then with HS2, you get on to the technical specification, which was the first point of failure, which was to create a railway which was going to be faster than anybody else's in Europe, in a country which is smaller than most European countries. Why do you want to do that?
Yeah, well, we digress. No, you also cite striking data showing that the UK road construction costs 20% more than international peers, rail costs twice as much, and nuclear power costs 50% more. Behind things that we've mentioned earlier, planning friction. What do you see as the structural factors within the supply chain which are still driving up these costs?
Well, I think there's no doubt, if you talk to quite a few of the contractors in the last couple of years, they have just become a lot more picky. And they are not interested in taking the risks that they were asked to take in the past. Now, I think that's a good thing. And the word collaborative approach to program management is now part and parcel of day-to-day thinking. You still face shortages of labour. You still face shortages of skilled people. So up go your labour costs, up go your skilled people costs. The planning system is still one in which, when you're designing, you try and cross the bridges before you come to them. So what are they going to complain about? Oh, they're going to complain about this. Well, we better put in some more of that, some more of the other. You've got a nuclear inspectorate, which in the past has sort of been a law unto itself. So, well, yes, there might be all these power stations around the world which are working perfectly well, perfectly satisfactorily, but they're not designed to the UK standards. So let's roll in some more safety standards. And so all the thinking is not how can we build this cheaper. All the thinking is about how can we make this a more perfect cake, which is guaranteed to rise, is guaranteed to taste beautiful, etc. Will satisfy everybody sitting around the table. Well, if you do that, you finish up with a very expensive cake. And I think that's part of the UK problem.
Yeah, well, you mentioned housing earlier, and a lot of the reason why we're struggling to build the number of houses we want is simply because it's just so incredibly expensive to build.
It's gone up. Yep. It's gone up by 30% probably. Yeah, and then just in the last 2 or 3 years, it's gone up by 25-30%.
So is embracing industrialisation, off-site manufacturing and modern methods of construction, is that the genuine game changer for UK productivity, or is that kind of the icing on the cake compared to broader planning and legal reforms?
You don't build a factory which needs to work 24/7 to be efficient if you haven't got throughput. And unless you can see continuity of demand, which is why all the factories for modular which have been put up in the last 10 years are now standing idle, because there is not the demand. And so you can't afford to do a factory approach if, in fact, you haven't got continuity of demand. And the last time we had that factory successful approach was actually way back in the 1960s, when all the big contractors had their own factories, because there was a volume of what at the time was called council housing coming through on the order books that you could afford to build and run those factories. Yeah. So until you get that similar marketplace today, then there's no point in going modular.
Is the new hospital programme that kind of programme which maybe does the same kind of thing as the old council house programme, or is it just not big enough?
I don't think it's big enough, and I don't think you would get the consistency amongst all the medical experts to have a consistent design.
Right. I mean, well, they talk about going from 2,000 doors to only having 20 doors, or they go, having.
We did all this years and years ago in a project called Nucleus. So there were Nucleus hospitals, and the idea was that the nurse could go to the same room in the same corridor to the same cupboard, and there she would find the same piece of kit. And we managed to sell that overseas. We never made it work here.
No. Well, yeah. Let's see, because I mean, when I speak to the new hospital programme, they do talk a very good game about those kind of problems being talked through with the clinical staff. Yeah.
Yep. And to be fair, if they can do it, then great. I mean, the programme's gone back by 10 years already. The 40 hospitals, which was never 40 hospitals anyway. I mean, again, tell the public we're going to build 40 new hospitals by 2030. Lift the lid. And there were about 5 new hospitals in that. They're all extensions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, embracing. I do like the fact that they're embracing industrialisation. It does feel like there's some kind of new thinking going on there. But yeah,
it ought to be right. But we have to create the environment in which it can be right.
Yeah. How effective then is the current 10-year strategy and project pipeline provided by government in supplying that, giving that supply chain confidence that it needs to invest in modern equipment?
Well, as soon as we announced it, we said, the credibility of this is going to depend on whether what is in this pipeline actually appears at the rate at which we're saying it appears. And if it doesn't, then people will stop believing in it very quickly.
We are assured constantly, John, that every single project on that pipeline is approved and it's going and it's happening. It's not a wish list.
Well, one of the roles of NISTA, in fact, is to actually prevent things from going forward too quickly.
Yeah.
So what Treasury was wanting was for NISTA to actually run the ruler on this new phrase guardrails, to provide guardrails, so an advice to Treasury that you cannot sign this project off yet, because in looking at it, we don't believe they've got all the ducks in a row. We don't believe they've got sufficient information to be able to have a firm estimate of the cost. So it needs to slow down until they've got there. So in a sense, yes, it's designed to actually provide more certainty, but in trying to provide more certainty, you inevitably are going to slow things down.
One of the things, of course, that NISTA is doing is it's reducing the number of projects that it's responsible for from a couple of hundred to around about 80 now. Is that
270 to about 80?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's simply the reality. With the number of people that they've got, you haven't got the time or the resources to look at 280 projects. So let's concentrate on, the 80 most important ones. Now, there's nothing wrong with that as a theory, but you then have to question, well, what's going to happen to the non-80 ones? Are they going to sort of fall off the back of the shelf, or are they going to be left sort of lacking attention? Because they're not one of the selected 80.
No, well, they're going to be put into the departmental
into the
process.
departments. Yeah.
Which is a good thing, is it? I don't know, or a bad thing?
Well, it is. It's not a good thing if the department there's no consistency about the budget that it's going to have to do these things.
Okay. Next steps then in policy. I mean, referring to Andy Burnham's comment that the collective failure of politicians to meet the challenges of the modern era. What direct advice would you give him then to ensure that his regional infrastructure programs and his policy of devolving power to the regions, they don't fall into the same traps as many other national schemes?
Well, the difficulty with devolution, and as the NIC, we used to argue strongly that the major cities should be the best deciders of what infrastructure, transport infrastructure, for example, they needed to make their city work. But then you come up against the fact that, well, have they got the people? Have they got the resources to do that? And it's a bit of a vicious circle, because as things aren't happening, then people aren't going to move to these cities in the hope that something might happen. They want to see that, oh, yes, things are really happening in X, Y, and Z cities. So therefore, it's worth my while upping from the southeast, away from central government, and going to be part of that team in Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol, Leeds, wherever it might be. And it's a bit chicken and egg. So to take those projects forward, they require really good teams within those local authority areas to be able to determine what they're doing. Because we've seen in the past local authorities go off and invest in shopping centres and get taken for a ride, and then subsequently losing lots of money.
Yeah.
So it's these things are not easy, and the real issue. And of course, what they've then got to accept is they can no longer blame government.
No, because they've been handed the challenge,
And of course, again, it's not easy to say you can't turn around with a city population and say, oh, we're going to have a new a mass transit rail system to get you all around a lot easier. The fact that it's going to take 10 years, we'll forget to mention that. So the next time you've got an election coming up, people have said, well, what's happened to this mass transit road? Oh, I see we've got some cones in the road, but we haven't got much else.
No, but we're still going to have the same issues around the fact that politicians want to have sexy schemes which turn the heads of the electorate. And we still hear a lot of ongoing debates surrounding Northern Powerhouse Rail, reinstating the cancelled northern legs of HS2. I mean, should resurrecting high-speed rail connectivity across the north be a core priority, or should they be focusing on other things such as power networks or housing? Yeah,
they have to do everything, the Northern Powerhouse Rail is complex. The sheer physical nature of it makes it a very complex project. I mean, there was a lady whose name I forget from one of the universities who wrote a book about mission projects. And she used Apollo as being the example of how you can do something which everybody thinks is impossible. But if you take the mission-led approach to it, you can do it. Now, that's great with, you might say the Olympics was like that. But you can't do it to 100 different projects at the same time.
Right.
Because you lose that focus. So, but how do you drive something along on a continuous basis? Well, very simply, you have to have consistency and continuity of government support. And if you don't have continuity and consistency, and if you're not open and frank with the voter about what it's going to take, the fact that they are going to be paying for it. There's no free infrastructure. You pay for it either through general taxation or as a consumer. There are no other options.
Which brings me to another great phrase you use. I mean, you cited the damaging impact of ministers who do not fully understand or care about the long-term consequences of their decisions, which is pretty punchy, I thought. Anyway, given the constant, frequent reshuffling of cabinet ministers, and we mentioned them earlier, I mean, how does the Prime Minister enforce long-term accountability in their departmental leadership?
Well, they themselves have got to be seen as extremely powerful individuals. And, you don't always get that. My most cynical view of this, Anthony, over the last year or so has been that long-term strategic thinking is actually, you cannot do it in a Western democracy. So we're actually, as Zig said on Times Radio this morning, we're a billion miles away from that, really. Yeah. And that is the...
You need a bit more benign dictatorship.
Frankly, yes. But the difficulty is the benign bit, isn't it? It's everybody's view of what is benign is going to be different. Maybe we try to do too much. Maybe if we did fewer things well, rather than trying to do multiple things.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is leadership. You're talking about leadership effectively.
Yes.
It's kind of giving people a kind of a North Star and saying we're going to get there, and actually then demonstrating that we can get there. And that's been pretty much missing, I think.
Well, yes. And in fact, you've got to... it's... If you just take what's happened in defence, and all of a sudden the Minister of Secretary of State for Defence becomes the Chancellor. So he's got to sort of completely jump from one side of the horse to the other in a nanosecond, not seem to lose credibility because he backs off his defence demands, but on the other side sort of say, well, sorry myself, I can't afford to do this. And you feel for people put into that position. And, arguably, you would say, well, don't take the job if you don't think you're going to get the wherewithal to do it. And that must have been a difficult one for John Healey to take on board. I think most of us wish him well and think he's potentially a very good candidate, but to be Chancellor. But it's not easy, given the competing demands. And we want green energy, but how are we going to pay for it? And are we prepared to pay for it? We want clean water. Are we really prepared to pay for 80% clean rivers as opposed to the 14% we've got at the moment?
Well, finally then, if the government, John, agreed tomorrow to establish an OBRI, what were the first 3 practical steps that needed to be taken with say the first 100 days to get it up and running?
Well, you've got to set up the body. Normally the government will spend at least a year doing that. So let's start by trying to see whether we could do that in 3 months instead of 15. And then pick some targets, some policies, and say, well, let's try and not do everything in the first 6 months. Let's take some particular government policies and come out with some very clear thinking as to whether those are deliverable and obtainable, and what should be done instead, but simply that open debate about, look, we've set ourselves an objective here, guys. Frankly, you're not going to achieve it unless. And that's the sort of thing which it could do. And you then just choose your subject areas. I mean, from the public's point of view, probably housing is the one which you would start with. Yeah. Energy costs is clearly a really live debate. That is not easy. I mean, the decision the Prime Minister's got to make up in the North Sea, you could argue that is more emotional than. The amounts of oil and gas which are going to come out of Rosebank and the other one are not that great in the wider nation of things.
But there's a geopolitical element to that as well, isn't there?
There's a geopolitical message in that one, which is important. But yet it becomes sort of the centrepiece of an environmental argument, and yet it's actually on the fringes of environmental impact.
I suppose finally then, John, you've worked for many many governments of different, or with many governments of different colour. You have you have a background of working also quite closely with the Labour Party. If Andy Burnham came to you and said, John, I need you to sort this out. I need you to sort out infrastructure. Would you be there stepping forward, whether it's in the House of Lords or whether it's in a ministerial role? Is that how you see your future?
I think that's highly unlikely to happen. I mean, look at me, Anthony. I've not got a child today. That must be the first time for.
You don't need a tie for comfort nowadays, John. Don't worry.
You don't need a tie, no. Nor should you. But I mean, in reality,
the UK needs people like you to be driving. I'd mentioned leadership. It needs people with clarity of vision and experience. I mean, why wouldn't you?
Of course, I would. Of course, I would be willing to help in a sensible way. But, let's be blunt about this. I'm 80, I'm not 50. And therefore, you've got to be sensible about things. And there is the following generation of people behind me who you would say probably ought to be looked at before you look at, if you look at somebody who's getting a bit long in the tooth. But if I can help, if I can support, if I can give advice, then I'd be delighted to do so.
Great, John. Well, you got my vote. Anyway, look, John, it is always great to chat to you and to delve into your mind and to hear ways that this fantastic sector, because it is a fantastic sector, can genuinely help accelerate the way that it improves the lives and communities across the UK, because fundamentally, let's not forget, that's what we're trying to achieve here. It's also great to hear how you continue to agitate and advise our leaders, because I think it needs to be done as well. Turning that ambition into reality won't happen unless people like you are making that agitation. So, look, thanks for joining me once again on the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. Enjoyed it. You're very kind. Thank you.
Good stuff. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for today on the podcast, but there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to John. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.